Welcome, Jeremy, to the show. I don't want to argue with you today because you're an expert in conflict. So why don't you start by explaining what you do, and then let's dive in, because we're in a toxic world today and people need to know how to avoid conflict. And if it comes up, how to get through it. And you're the pro.
Thanks, David. I appreciate it. I'm happy to be here. My name is Jeremy Pollack. I run a company called Pollack Peace Building Systems. We're a nationwide, actually, we just went into the UK, so we're technically international now, conflict resolution consulting firm. We do coaching, training, and conflict interventions with at organizations. So when coworkers and colleagues aren't getting along, or leadership's having some problems with a particular department that's having a lot of conflict, we can help step in and solve some of those things. And personally, I've been a coach for the last 12 years. Started my consulting firm about 5 years ago after I got my graduate degree in conflict resolution and peace building. And I've just been growing and working ever since, and finding a lot of interesting opportunities to help a lot of companies figure out how to manage conflict and prevent it if possible.
Well, I would think you have a big upside on your business today with all the conflict that we have going on, and the social media and major media, kind of promoting whether the pandemic or politics or whatever, people isolating and being judgmental and scared. And I mean, it's got to be a really tough environment for you to go in and kind of help these people. Do you actually help them kind of wake up to, oh yeah, I made those assumptions, or I made those judgments, or I could have taken a different process? Because we're being taught in so many ways right now to kind of just withdraw and judge. And then that goes into companies and can be quite toxic, I'm sure.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think a lot of what we do, we are helping people become more self-aware. So what kind of assumptions and judgments they're making, but it's really context dependent, So the way that I think of conflict is conflict is essentially arises, at least interpersonal conflict. And I think intergroup conflict too. It arises a lot of times because of perceived threats. So someone has a perceived threat, some sort of threat, even unconsciously, they're perceiving unconsciously a threat to some basic psychological or basic physical need that they have, or a basic goal that they have. And what we need to do in conflict resolution is we need to figure out a way to mitigate the perception of that threat. We need to get people back to a place of like, hey, we're actually not here to threaten each other. We're actually here to be on the same team and align if possible. And how do we do that? What are some techniques to do that? So that's kind of what I'm thinking about. Other practitioners have other frameworks through which they look, but I really think about it as threat perception, mitigating threat perception, preventing threat perception. And then on the other side of that, looking to how do I as a person, and especially how do I as a leader of an organization, create a culture, a system that helps to fulfill or satisfy the basic needs of individuals. And I don't mean just like food, shelter, clothing. I mean psychological needs, identity, autonomy, a feeling of being cared for, a feeling of psychological safety. Those are basic needs. If my organization is not set up to do that, and it's actually set up to potentially threaten or impede those needs or goals, then I'm sure to have conflict. So that's kind of what we do. We try to figure out what needs are being threatened here. How do we mitigate the threat perception? How do we create a system in which people can feel like they're thriving rather than feel like they're being impeded in some way?
So let's start with the first one. So let's give me an example. I'm in an entrepreneurial organization and something happens where I feel threatened. How should I respond instead of react?
So do you mean like as a leader or as an employee?
You make although we have a lot of leaders here to help them understand how an employee might respond or react, why don't we start with an employee?
Well, so here's a simple one. So, and this is, I've dealt with this as a coach several times now. Let's say, so there's an individual and they're having lots of conflicts at the organization, right? And this happened recently, where they are basically feeling isolated and alone. They're feeling like no one's listening to their concerns. And everyone else that's working with them is feeling, oh, this person's playing a victim card. They're always complaining. I don't know how to deal with that person and all that stuff. So there's this ongoing dynamic. And the system is set up essentially to let that kind of conflict emerge, because what we learn quickly is the system is not addressing any of this in any kind of way. It's just kind of allowing it to go on. Leaders are burying their head in the sand. We don't really want to deal with it. Luckily, they've come to us so that we can actually step in, and they're actually saying we want to do something about it. So let's get a coach in here. Let's get a consultant in here to help figure this out. But I think a lot of times, for it, like at a very sort of simple example, is this individual is feeling like she's not being heard. So, and this is, I think a very common one, but she's not being heard because she's feeling like I'm doing my best. No one has acknowledged that. And when I bring it up, I get attacked for bringing it up. So now I have nothing I can't bring it up. I can't get acknowledged. I'm walking on eggshells. And then this spirals, and this creates this, it's this, what in psychology, you call it a hostile attribution bias. It's this filter through which she now attributes all actions from the people in her organization as being somewhat hostile. Every time she gets an email from certain leaders, from her direct supervisor, it's challenging me. It's this person's trying to catch me doing something wrong. And I could look at the email and go, that's a completely benign email. They're just asking a question. But because of the filter now that's operating with this individual, because she's in a place of threat perception, she's attributing it, oh, they're trying to catch me, they're trying to challenge me. So we need to start figuring out how to become more self-aware and react differently. Now, part of that is me, if I'm coaching this individual, going, let's talk about the meaning and the interpretation you're placing on that behavior. In other words, that email, whatever, like the question they're answering. Let's talk about how we can separate those two things out. That's one way. Let's be more self-aware. Is this really, do you think, what she means? And so sort of having a conversation with it. And then that way, at least she has someone to talk to about this. She has someone to converse about this. And I can validate her feelings, and I can be that person that actually hears her and recognizes it. But there also has to be changes in the system, because if someone's feeling like that on an ongoing basis and the organization isn't doing anything about it, well, that's a problem too. So how does the organization leadership step in and figure out, okay, what do we do here with these two individuals? How do we get them communicating better? As opposed to just letting one of them quit or having to fire one of them or something like that. So there's a lot of different complexities.
What's typically the situation when you have somebody like that doesn't feel heard, which then I would think leads to, I'm not respected, my contributions aren't valued, blah, blah, blah. It's kind of the exact opposite of doing meaningful work.
Right. Right.
So how do you get them to hear they're wounded?
Yeah.
And they're probably someone who's internalized a lot, which you've indicated. So now you're trying to get them to not internalize, but share with the coach. How do you get them to overcome that fear? And now this conclusion, or I don't know what the proper term would be. I mean, now they're deeply convinced nobody likes me, everybody hates me, Yeah.
Well, so it's very unlikely that is going to change in a vacuum. So it's very unlikely that I'm going to be able to coach someone to sort of flip the way they're thinking without anything else changing. So what's going to be probably important is for whoever's in charge of this organization, or at least of this department, whoever's leading the department, to figure out what's our, sort of best case scenario, what's our worst case scenario? What do we really want here? Do we want to spend time and resources and energy to fix the situation because we don't want to lose this person for whatever reason? Whether they feel like it's too risky to lose the person because they might come back and sue us, or whether they feel like they're so valuable, it'd be very hard to replace them. They have to make a decision. Do we want to put the time and resources in to actually fix this? Or not. Like if they're just kind of sort of half in, half out, like, let's try something, but if it doesn't work, let's just fire them, or that's not a great starting point. But if they do decide, like, we want to at least spend some amount of resources, energy, time trying to fix this because we don't want to lose this person, then I think it's important to bring in at least their direct supervisor, if not other people that are kind of directly working with this individual, and have some coaching for them too, because something has to change in the dynamic. This person's not feeling heard, not feeling respected, recognized, et cetera. She's internalized it. There's techniques that the other individual in that dynamic, whether it's that, direct supervisor, there's techniques that direct supervisor can learn to potentially start recognizing that individual more, to start having a better dynamic, a better working relationship, a healthier working relationship, a lot of times we do a facilitated dialogue, what you might call like a relational mediation. So to help them learn techniques as to what their personality styles and communication styles are like, and how each of them are interpreting each other's actions. Because almost always when one person is feeling like I'm being victimized, they don't recognize me, they don't hear me, the person on the other side of that is going, I've tried everything. I've done everything I can. I'm a nice person. I'm not trying to do this. I'm not trying to be bad. And there's nothing I can do. And they just won't accept it. So I don't know what to do at this point. That's usually where we find people on the other side. And we just have to get them out of that particular dynamic, because it's a stuck dynamic, and figure out, okay, if you both want to change this dynamic, if you both want to change this, let's give you some tools. Let's get you talking so you can both recognize what it is that each other is doing or saying and how you're interpreting it. So you're way more aware. And then there's other things too, to build trust, build that relationship, build more rapport with each other, so that eventually like things don't get just automatically attributed as hostile.
Yeah, forgive me, I'm not trying to nitpick, but so I can sense what happens if I'm the manager or I'm a team member. And so I learn to ask questions more, seek the person's opinion more, kind of hear them out more. And if I go with what they want, then that's easy. Then they start feeling heard because I've gone with what they want. But how does the dynamic work when I'm the other party, or it's not me necessarily, somebody's the other party, they learn some better skills, they are sincerely working harder at hearing the person out. But for whatever reason, right or wrong, they disagree with the person in the end. And how does that dynamic work? Can the person who's feeling like the victim actually develop trust because they're feeling heard, although what they're recommending is not being accepted or approved, and the person's going with them? How does that work?
That I see this a lot too, where if like, so I'm a disgruntled, worker, and I'm putting forth my ideas, and my ideas are never getting heard and they're never being considered. One thing that I tend to find is it doesn't matter whether it's always being agreed with, or you're always giving the person their way, or agreeing with them, or, giving them what they want. What matters really too is, are you considering it? Are you actually acknowledging what they're saying or how their ideas are? Does it seem like you're considering it, thinking about it before just dismissing it? So what I find a lot of times when I start coaching people, or when I even do like an intervention between two people, is the person that's not feeling heard, or maybe they're both not feeling heard, they say something and the immediate response to it is a dismissal. It's yeah, but that won't work because this, right? Instead we have to develop techniques to go, okay, well, that's interesting. Let me think about that. I'm seeing a challenge with that because of this. Did you think about that challenge? Like, how would you address that challenge? Like, so like, I'm going to consider the value in what you're saying. I'm actually going to consider the merit in what you're saying. But here's the problem I see with it. I don't think we should just dismiss it outright. But can you tell me what you would do to address the challenge that I'm seeing with it? Or why am I seeing a challenge that you're not seeing? So having that conversation, as opposed to just going, it's not going to work. That's it, So you don't have to agree. Now, the other part of this is, I think that if you get into this situation where over and over, and this is very similar to what I was just working through. If you get into a situation where over and over, you're trying to consider someone's ideas, you just don't agree, and they can't feel heard and all that. You can bring this up in a very deliberate and like sort of conspicuous way. You can say, listen, I want us to get along better. I think it's important that we get along better. I don't dislike you. I like you. I think you're a valuable person here. I want to work with you, but we never seem to get on the same page. And I don't know why. What can we do to get on the same page? How do I at least make you feel more heard? And I know that I can work on stuff too, right? I know that, so taking some responsibility, being very conspicuous and sort of deliberate about the dynamic, going, I'm acknowledging this dynamic. I know is a problem. I want to change it. What do you think we should do? How do we get through this? And inviting the person into that conversation. So you're not just like, here's what we're going to do. I'm inviting you, and I want to collaborate with you on this solution. I want to talk about this in a collaborative way. So sometimes that can work.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense because, a lot of the great leaders ask great questions. Even look back at Jesus when he, went to the well or whatever, the pond where the guy wanted to be healed. He asked him, "What do you want?" Well, obviously the guy wants to be healed. He's been there like 38 years, 40 years, whatever, but he asked, "What do you want?" And reminds me of Greg Kokel, who uses what he calls the Columbo questions. So he asks, "Well, what do you mean by that?"
Yeah.
And so you get the person to explain, and you actually listen, ask some questions. And then the second one will be, "Well, why do you believe that's true? Or why do you believe that's the best solution?"
Yeah.
And I think what you're alluding to too is that a lot of times that person who's blowing the other person off or putting up a wall thinks that it needs an immediate decision.
Yes, absolutely.
And many times if you make the relationship first, you choose the relationship first, the decision can wait a few hours or a few days or a few weeks or whatever. And so you can allow time for the dialogue, because I don't know about you, but sometimes I find those people that get stuck in the victim mode take a while to think things through.
Yeah.
They're more analytical versus the type A's or the high D's on the disc who are just, here's my decision.
You know what? You said that perfectly. I deal with this so much, like where we have type A's, especially as leaders. I deal with a lot of attorneys and sort of leaders, and they're very type A. They want to get to solutions very quickly. That's just the mode that they're in. And then when they start having all these sort of relational problems, they go, what's going on here? And they have to put, if they're interested in having better relationships, and they actually recognize having better relationships ultimately will make my life easier and it'll make my business better. Yeah. That's key. They put the relationship first. Wait a minute. Let me not jump to solution here. Let me put the relationship first. Let me hear this person out. Let me consider their ideas. Let me toss it around with them a little bit before I jump into solution. I love the way that you put that. It's really important. And the Columbo questions is also like, if you're asking, well, why do you want that? But doing it in a way that you're actually curious and it's an authentic why. It's not you're trying to catch them or you're trying to lead the witness into some trap, right? You're actually curious. Why do you? Because you may not have thought of something that they have thought about, or you may not see it from their perspective. So that's another good point.
Yeah, that's excellent. So if I'm an organization and we want to basically structure our culture, because no organization has their company values. We argue often, we fight to the death, whatever it is.
Right.
So how can we structure things so people learn the soft skills where they're going to be able to avoid conflict most of the time, and when it pops up, they're able to resolve it relatively quickly?
I think I can go off of just some of the major conflict themes that I see. And one of them is this idea of people not feeling heard, recognized, respected, their voice not mattering. That's a very, very common one. So I think one thing that organizations ought to be doing more of, if they're not already, is creating collaborative cultures. And what that means is when decisions are being made that are affecting other people, as often as possible, creating a space for people to have an input in those decisions and actually considering their ideas. And so I've done this, as a leader in my own organization. This is the type of organization that I want to have. There's some times where I have to make decisions, but almost all the time before I make a decision, I involve the people that it's going to affect in the conversation. At the end of the day, if I don't agree and I can see the sort of a bigger picture and I have to go a certain way, then that's what I have to do. But I want to make sure that if I do that, they all understand the reason I made the decision. I need to be clear about my intentions, about the reasons I made it, about how I came to the conclusion, so that they don't feel like I just dismissed them and I didn't think about what they were saying. And a lot of times I've also found myself where I make a decision, or I think like I have the good route here. Let me involve other people, some of my staff, and we talk about it, we collaborate. I hear some ideas that I didn't think about and I change the direction. And sometimes even if I don't totally know if I agree with it, I'm not sure, but 5 out of the other 6 people all said the same thing, and I didn't see that, I'm going to go with the 5 out of 6. I'm going to try it. What's the worst that can happen? So I think sometimes leaders have to be open to being in a really collaborative space and considering ideas that they might not have always agreed with at the start, maybe trying some new stuff. That's certainly one way.
Let's talk about that for a moment, because some people, if they're not used to it, and I'm speaking from past experience, because I learned through making mistakes. It's my high level skill. So, as a leader, how do they come out and bring this forth to other people? There's this decision to be made, and want your input. How do they do that in a way versus many leaders are in a habit, because they're trying to drive, of just say, okay, we're going in this direction. But really what they're saying is, we have to make a decision on this. And what do you think about it? But that's not the way they word it.
Yeah. Man, I've gotten myself into trouble testing both extremes of this sort of approach, right? So I've gone with the mandate approach, like, here's what we're doing. And I didn't explain myself. I just said, here's what we're doing. And that's gotten me into a lot of problems with my staff. And I realized that I need to be more forthright by my intentions. I've also gone the complete other way, where I don't provide any direction. I just open it up, and it's totally collaborative, but that ends up a lot of times being inefficient. And sometimes they feel like, well, where's our leader? What happened to him? Like, why aren't you giving us any direction? Right? So there's this fine line, this balance between the two places. So I think that if I'm going to bring something in, I'm going to have a particular idea first, a direction that I kind of maybe suggest. And I would bring it into the conversation. I'll either put it as an agenda item on our weekly staff meeting, or if it's a longer conversation, I'll ask people if they're willing, if they're open to, like, a certain meeting just for that. And I'll schedule it out. So I'm not taking people's unscheduled time. We all schedule the meeting, and I'll bring it in and say, so here's the decision that has to be made. Here's what I'm thinking, and here's why I'm thinking it. But I want to give it open to suggestions. So anybody have any thoughts about this, questions, concerns about that direction, that kind of thing. So that's how I usually do it. And then it opens up stuff. And at this point, I think I'm hoping that everybody in my organization knows that I'm actually asking because I'm really wanting to consider other ideas if they have them. I think at first they have to build trust that you're not just asking just to ask, and you're not going to just sort of dismiss it and do what you want anyway. But so they build that trust. And after a while, they do get to know, like, he's actually asking us because he wants to know what we think and he wants to consider it. And that's super important. That's a great, for me, having come from no trust, no rapport to a place where I feel like we have a lot of trust and rapport within my organization. It's just a huge difference in both our productivity and everyone else's stress levels.
Are there times where you've got somebody and they want to do something, you think you need to go right, they want to go left, and you talk about it, and you have to make a decision about whether you want control and you're going to drive it right, or or letting them go left for a certain period of time to prove their concept, right or wrong, and having the courage, the discipline to do that because you're valuing the relationship and you want to show them that. And does that ever happen? And if so, then how do you do that?
Okay. This is a great question. This actually happened to me this week. Okay. So I have an employee who has a particular job, and an opportunity came up within the organization. So an opportunity came up that, and with an actual client of ours, that she wants to actually go do something for the client that's different than her normal job. So she would be taking some focus away from her normal job, which is a very important job. So I brought up a concern right away when I heard that she wanted to do this. And I said, I want you to do what you want to do. Absolutely. If you feel inspired to do this, I want to figure out how to have you do this. But I'm seeing a challenge because you're going to take focus away from your role, and that could create some problems in these ways. So I'm feeling a little concerned about that. Have you thought about how you would, address that and make sure you can get both things done and not feel, crazy? And so we had that conversation. I totally opened it up, and I had to make that exact decision. I had to say, at the end of the day, I am concerned. I don't necessarily want her to go do this because of not my own sort of self, but just for the organization, because everybody depends on this person for this one role. So I'm concerned about that. However, if I look at the long term and I look at the relationship over the long term, what's going to be a bigger benefit is stopping her from doing what she wants and making sure she focuses on this, or being creative and seeing what happens if I say, you have my blessing, go ahead and do that. Let's work together to figure out how to manage your other role while you're focused on this thing for a little while. And I have to figure out, like, is it worth it? Is the cost worth the benefit and that kind of thing? And I'm, at the end of the day, I think if I put relationship first and I put psychological needs first, meaning she has a basic need to grow, to practice what she loves and to do, I need to allow her to go do that, for some period of time and see what happens. And I look at worst case scenarios. In the worst case scenario, what might happen? Can I handle that? Can I deal with worst case scenario from this situation? And I'm like, okay, I think I can deal with it, So I'm considering the cost of benefits, worst case scenarios, and I do think relationship comes first. And I want to let you do what you want to do. So,
separate of my agreement with you, relationship comes first, and that, to be candid with you, is something that's really come out in the last year. I learned it from a guy named Danny Silk, who does a bunch of soft skills training. And but I want to call out two things that I think are very wise that you did. Was, first of all, and just before I got on this podcast, I had a client email me and say, hey, this came up. What do I do? Because I'm in disagreement with another manager. And one of the things I recommended was he needed to approach some employees about working overtime this weekend and how to do that. And I talked about, that he could approach them and say, how do I make this work for you? And you did the same thing. And I think that's something that the audience really needs to hear. Two of these pieces. One piece is that because you're putting the relationship first, ideally you can sincerely offer, how do I help you do this?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you were sincere about that. You were like, I may disagree, but I respect you and our relationship is important. So how do I help you do that? That's huge and a big change, a big habit change for a lot of people, a lot of driven leaders.
Yeah. The
second thing is that either you broke it down into smaller pieces versus, okay, you can go do this for a month, and you're going to follow up. So you didn't just give the person the green light and goodbye, wish you luck, but because I'm committed to your success, I'm going to stay connected. Whether you guys are doing a daily check-in or every couple of days or a week, I don't know what's appropriate, but you're not letting it ride. And then that person could potentially fail.
Right.
And then that hurts your relationship. Whereas if you catch it early when it's going sideways, then it's not going to hurt you badly, right? Am I correct?
Well, yeah. And I also think that taking the approach of, that I want to support you in this. So in other words, I'm not just going to say, go do it and we'll see what happens. And like in my back of my mind, I'm like waiting for her to fail so that I can prove myself right. That's not what I'm doing, because that will not only hurt her and my relationship with her, that will also hurt my organization. So what I want to do is, hey, I'm going to figure this out. If we're deciding that you're going to go do this, then we're going to brainstorm on how to figure out how we're going to support you to do this. So who's going to fill in over here when you're not focused on this? Who's going to do this? I'm going to make sure that I can fill in places if I need to, or whatever needs to happen so that nothing falters. And we can prove that you can actually do this instead of I'm going to prove that you can't. Right. So I want to support and encourage people to grow as they want and to do the things that they love to do. And I think that's how you get the best out of people, because, to have them do what they really love and to feel valued for it. So,
that example may be the big value for the audience here, but I do want to ask you one question. It's a little bit on the negative side, but it's not meant to be negative. I view it actually as a positive. What do you do when you're called in to coach in a situation and someone, using your example, it can be something different, feels like the victim, not heard, not engaged, not respected, whatever. But as you work with the people involved, you find out that either the person who feels like the victim or the person that's making them feel that way isn't a good fit with the organization.
Yeah.
And the coaching can't help them, but actually the advice you're going to have for them that has tremendous value is that, hey, you need to make a hard decision on this person and help them transition out.
That's happened several times. Absolutely. So, I mean, one of the things that I find in coaching is I'm either going to help people reestablish trust and rebuild a relationship, or I'm going to help them. In my best case is to separate peacefully, rather than separate, with anger and retaliation and all that. So I've done that several times. We get to the point at some point where we go, this isn't changing. The dynamic's not changing. No one's putting enough effort in. It doesn't seem like a good fit. And I have to help coach someone out of the job. And I don't do it like, inauthentically. I don't do it because I'm doing it like sort of secretly for the organization. I actually work with the person and go, is this really the right place for you? Nothing is changing. You're not happy. Why do you want to stay here? And a lot of times they want to stay there because they're afraid of going out in the world. They might not get another job. They might not have the same income. They don't know what's going to happen. And then, okay, well, that's something you and I can work with. We can talk about building your confidence, building your resume, figuring out, how do you go out in the world and go, I'm going to be okay. I'm going to figure it out. We can work on that because that's just something you can control. What we can't control is fixing everyone else in this organization. So that's sometimes what we have to do. And my whole goal in that scenario is getting them to the place where they feel like they can walk away from the organization and they're going to be fine. Their life's fine, right? They're not scared. They're not going to be in the doghouse, and they're fine. So, and that's typically, in those, like, I would say 30% of the time, when I come in, it's that was like, this is not a good place for you to be. It's toxic and it's not good for you.
Yeah, I'm glad I brought it up then, because I'm not doing coaching and consulting right now. I'm involved in some other projects, but in the past, I would get called in by bosses that said, hey, I got this employee that's been with me 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, whatever. It's just not working anymore. And I want to make certain I've given them the best shot to try to overcome the problems we're having. And if not, then we need to respectfully transition them out. So I need you to come in with a new lens, new perspective. And I think that's really where you come into play. And with that in mind, let's wrap up. How can people learn more about what you're doing, Jeremy? It sounds like you do excellent work, and you're very skilled. So where would they go online to learn more, maybe get a hold of you?
Yeah, they can come to our website, which is pollackpeacebuilding.com. That's my consulting firm, and pretty easy to get in touch with us there. I just came out with a book last month called the Conflict Resolution Playbook. That's on Amazon. Love people to go there and check it out too. That has a lot of very practical techniques, not just for the workplace, but also for personal relationships as well. Just very practical sequences and techniques to resolve conflicts.
Yeah, I think most of us, whatever soft skills we exhibit on the job, we bring those home, or vice versa.
Yep.
So there's not a lot of difference for most of us. There's not a Jekyll and Hyde type of scenario.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
Well, that's great. I hope people check out your book, and we'll certainly list that in the podcast notes. And thank you so much for coming today. I think this was great for people, gave them some good insights.
Yeah, thanks, David. I appreciate it. Happy to be here.